Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing Quokka Prime from scratch, and today's lesson is about the display of service monitoring information. Let's get started. So, reviewing where we are, we've implemented this thing over here, which is the Flask run. Our Quokka Prime server is running, getting requests, puts, gets, etc. We've implemented a number of monitors. You can see I have 3 different tabs here. This one on the left is my host monitoring tab. You can see I'm doing the hosts here. The one in the middle is my device monitor tab. I've cleaned up the code so that I'm not printing out so much stuff, and you can see that it's printing that out. And then we just recently implemented the service monitoring, so this is my service monitoring stuff. Now we have 2 displays that we've also implemented. One is this host display, which I'm showing here in its own window, and then the other is the device monitoring display, which I'm showing here in its own window. And the next thing that we will be doing is implementing the service monitoring display. So one thing I want us to remember when it comes to this service monitoring, here I have service monitoring on the left. Here is device monitor, which is pretty much the same as host monitor. I do want to remind you, when we implemented service monitor, we basically took it from Quokka Prime. That means it has some other stuff. You can see I've got some constants that I've defined here that are not present over on the device monitor or on the host monitor. You can see I'm taking in arguments for the pool size, which is an indication that we're doing concurrency, and Quokka, which is an indication that we're supporting connecting to remote Quokka servers. So we're able to parse those arguments, and if we were to just go down here and look at the actual main code, you'll be able to see I'm doing the thread pool executor here. I'm passing in the name of the function that we're going to call in order to do it. And that is something else that we're doing different in Service Monitor, and we're also doing object-oriented stuff. Remember, we'll get into this in more detail when I go into this, but I do have a service monitoring class, and I have subclasses called HTTP monitor, etc. So service monitor is a little bit bigger and more robust, and as we go into today's lesson, which is going to be simply displaying stuff so that not only will you be able to see the hosts and the devices, but we'll also be able to have a window up that shows the services and their status. So that's kind of just a comparison of previous work that we've done on host and device monitoring and what we actually did with service monitoring a little bit more. Now, when we copied over the service monitoring code from Quokka Prime and put it into our directory for Quokka Prime Scratch, if you recall, I did that through the command line. I'm going to do it different for no good reason other than it's a different way to do it. And we've done this before if you've been in other classes, but I'm just going to open up the file for service display, and I'm going to then select everything and then copy it into a new file that I'm going to create that's empty and place it in there in my own UI terminal. So first thing to do is to go get that original file from Quokka Prime. So now that I've opened it, I'm just, in order to keep things straight, I'm going to push it over to the right so that it will be a split screen. So now what I need to do is I'm going to add my own service display in my own UI terminal. So now that I have it in my UI terminal, there's nothing in it, of course. I'm going to go over here, select everything, copy it, and paste it. And now I have all of this stuff over in my own directory, and now we can begin to work on it. So I'll close this, put things back to normal, and here's my service display code. You can see it's got errors in it. We'll need to address those next. Now the next thing to do is to see what errors we have. It says we have two. If I were to click on this, it would say what those are. They're both in line number 8, as you can see there. And that is because in line number 8, what I did was I centralized storing these Quokka constants in Quokka prime, from which I get display wait time, so that I only had to set it once and I didn't have magic constants flying around. For simplicity, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this, and now I'll have an error down here where it says display wait time. And one of the things that I did in the background between the last 2 sessions is I changed my display wait time from 60 seconds to 15, so I'm just going to set that to 15. You can see this is happy, and we should be able to try to run it and see what happens. So let's take a look at this code that we're using to display the service monitoring data. Now it's going to look familiar to you if you're familiar with the host display and the device display. We'll have a function called get services, and what we're going to do here is the normal HTTP request. The request is because I'm passing in arguments, it's going to be looking for the correct Quokka server, and it's going to go to the endpoint called services, which we have implemented, and it's going to actually return whatever came back to us from JSON. That will be the services that we got back. There is a function called print services, and what print services is going to do, this should look somewhat familiar. I'm printing the title here, and then I'm going to go through and set the color appropriately, availability, the response time, looking at how it compares to the SLA that's been set for the response time, and the name, we're trying to figure out if it's new or if it's not new. And if it's new, then if it's been there before, then basically we're going to use the regular green. Otherwise we're going to use light green, which indicates that this is something new. And then here's my long print statement, which takes a long time to figure out exactly how to organize everything, but that's what it is. And then the wait time. And the last thing is main. Main is basically just a while loop, and it's doing while true. It's going to get the services, it's going to print the services, and then because I'm storing stuff, this is something that is new. I'm saving the previous services so that I will know if they happen to be new or not. And if I can find the user interface for the services, it's actually right here. This is what the end result looks like. So that's the code. I go through this in other lessons in 52 Weeks of Python, etc., but that is the general idea of what it does. It's very similar to the host display and to the device display, but it is coming directly from Quokka Prime, so it has a few extra bells and whistles. Before I do try to run it, I know there's one thing I'll have to change in my service display, and that is this value right here. This port actually needs to be 5000, and it's actually kind of handy because it's in here in my argument for what the value of Quokka is. So that if I try to use it multiple times in this code, which I'm not in this code, but elsewhere I might, then I only have to change it this one time. And so that is the first thing to do. Now let's go ahead and try to run it. So here I am in UI terminal. I'm just going to try to run it right now. And lo and behold, it seems to be working the first time. That's pretty good. Let me make this so that it looks more appropriate. Okay. This is actually looking pretty good. So now I seem to have all of my display, all of my service monitoring stuff working. And the only thing that will remain is for me to explain to you about concurrency, about passing arguments, and about that object-oriented stuff in a little bit more detail, which I'll do in the next lesson. So before we move on, however, I do want to point something out. Let's talk about what service monitoring is. Maybe I should have put this as one of the first things that we talked about. But basically, we're monitoring services in the network. So there's DNS servers, there's HTTP sites, there's a device that I'm doing ICMP to. There's a couple of them, and there's one that I'm doing NTP to. So I'm not going to go into all the detail about all the different ways that you can do service monitoring type stuff, but just bear in mind that that is what we're doing. We read this information from a YAML file. We'll go through that in the data, and then what we do is we keep track of the availability, of course, and the response time, as we've done before, and then last heard. So it's similar to these other ones which we've done with availability and response time, etc. A difference is the coloring. So what I've done is I've implemented what I call service level agreements in the coloring for these particular items that we are monitoring. And so what green means is that it's good. I think I turn it bright green if it's a new value. I don't know if I'm doing new values. I think I might be. If it is red, that means I wasn't able to communicate with it. That means availability is false. And this, what is that? Cyan type of bluish, light bluish color. That's an indication that the response time was out of whack with what we thought the response time ought to be. And if this is working, and you can set each one individually. These right here that you can see that are higher are an indication that, hey, that's not meeting the criteria for the response time. And you can see, just as I've been talking, my monitoring of this us.pool.ntp.org actually failed. So there's, for some reason, I wasn't able to get the response time, although I was able to do it 1 minute ago. It's 9:30 now. At 9:29 it worked. Anyway, that's what service monitoring is all about. I figured I better explain that since it may be clear to me because I've been doing stuff like this my whole life, but less so to you guys. So that's been a discussion of how we display service monitoring data. Hopefully it made sense, and if not, as always, please let me know. And also, as always, thanks for listening. Hey, thanks for watching this episode on Quokka Prime from scratch. I'm Chuck Black. If you do have questions or comments, feel free to leave a message with this video. I'm also on Twitter at Chuck A. Black. If you want to send email with a question, comment, or just to say hi, the email address you can reach me at is python.52.weeks@gmail.com. Also, remember to subscribe to this channel. I hope these lessons are helping you to achieve your goals towards becoming a real software developer. So long for now, and see you at the next episode.